So we start now, I think this is the last session for the day, if I understand correctly. But this is also one of the important in terms of close to our heart also and close to science also. We are today having the physical session of OBTO, that is Oncology Beyond the Obvious. Around 1 year and 3 months back, Dr. Purvish, Parikh sir and myself, we started this concept where we realized that there are a lot of ambiguity and there are a lot of read between the lines in every trial, in every label of FDA. And we said that let us try to dissect this as much as possible so that the clear message goes to people who are listening or people who are attending, that what would they decipher out of this particular data. What you do in your clinic is your own decision, but we try to bring the data closer to reality as much as possible. We have been, I must say that without being too much of modest, that we have been very successful. In fact, there are so many of pharmaceutical companies, they have come and approached us and saying that, sir, please take this platform to international level. In addition to that, every conference which we go, we get to hear good things about OBTO. And last OBTO, I understand without any, we don't do any marketing much. We still had around 130 participants online. And again, the feedback what we get is heartening, and that helps us to make this program better and better. The format of the program is that we select one particular topic or one particular paper. It is divided into 3 parts. The first part is we invite one of the stalwart or one of the very experienced person to be interviewed by one of us, either myself or Parikh sir. After that, we have a panel discussion where we discuss the same topic what was discussed in interview again for 45 minutes. And the third part is, in the end, one of the expert gives his or her conclusion of what did he or she find take-home messages in the last 1.5 hours what they attended. Today's program is little unique because this is the second time we are having a physical OBTO. The first physical OBTO we had was in Mumbai, and this is thanks to Dr. Tarini Sahu for that. One of the unsung heroes of OBTO, I can say hero because now it looks like OBTO is well appreciated. One of the unsung hero who's standing in a blue shirt there is Kashish Parikh. He is part of Kavina Creations. We tell people in the end, vote of thanks mein bolte hai. Why I say his name first, I'll tell you the reason. There are many OBTOs. In fact, 70 to 80% of OBTOs, we do not have any sponsorship because the topic what we select is purely educational. Kashish has never even once asked me, sir, iska paisa kya, iska kahan pe kya? And Kashish, I genuinely thank you from all of us that this is an educational activity which you are supporting. I hope to make it up in future sometime, but right now, OBTO is some part thanks to you and your team. With that, for today's program, I would invite, the backbone of OBTO and the person without whom we know all of us owe our career to him, Dr. Purvish Parikh sir. Sir, please come. Sir's introduction, I'll say only one thing, and I love to say this sentence. Can somebody be so stupid and naive not to know Parikh sir? I think that introduction is enough for sir. Rest we all know about him. Over to sir.
So this OBTO, our roles are reversed. Normally I talk and praise Amish, and now he is paying back the same coin. So for this OBTO, I think the topic is relevant to all immune checkpoint inhibitors because they form a bulk of what has been approved by US FDA in the last few years. And so we had a real tough time in deciding whom to select as the person to be interviewed. And the person that we have finally had to select, there was no choice, was Dr. Chirag Desai. Dr. Chirag, can you please come over here? Dr. Chirag Desai is one of the first DM medical oncology student from GCRI. Is that correct? Yeah, perfect. And why we chose him for this US FDA related article is because of his experience. So what is the experience that we are talking about? He has worked with the biggest and largest CRO in India, that is Quintiles. He was project manager for them and then became the national oncology head for Quintiles. And you can imagine that that was happening when there was a lot of oncology trials that were being developed in India, much before the controversy came into the picture. So as head of oncology at the national level for Quintiles, he was evaluating projects from sponsors. He was selecting sites and initiating them. He was training the CRAs. He was overseeing monitoring. He was doing budget negotiations. He was also doing data analytics. And he was also designing clinical trials for others. So clearly everything that you talk about for a regulatory approval and data acquisition, he was doing. In addition, he has been a principal investigator for more than 75 clinical trials. Okay? So this is about his being a PI. But what about the regulatory aspect? So he is member of DSMB for 5 clinical trials. He is on the steering committee for 3 trials. He is an advisor to 4 other CROs. After he left Quintiles, his expertise were available to others also. He was a subject expert called by CDSCO for the government of India. He is an expert member of ICMR as well as National Cancer Grid. And he has been the scientific advisory board members and so on and so forth. Trials are over, data is ready, and now it is to be published. So he is an editorial board member of 4 medical journals. He has been a mentor for 45 students. And he went to Tata Memorial Hospital in Mumbai as an external evaluator for the PhD program. So you can clearly see that he is the right. In addition to that, he is an entrepreneur. He is a founder director for Vedanta, which is, I believe, India's first cooperative practice group. And he has led that to area of leadership, which is recognized and copied and emulated by others at the national level. So with these few words, Chirag, can I come there, sit next to you and start the interview? But before that, while most of you must have read the publication, I thought I would put some slides to summarize what is the publication in case you have not read it. So we have Dr. Chirag Desai as the interviewee, then Amish is going to moderate, and finally Govind Babu is going to give the expert comments. And Amish, I again thank you for being a last minute replacement. Actually, Dr. T. Raja was to moderate. Unfortunately, he is not well and could not come here. So this is the publication summary, the evidence base for US FDA approval of novel cancer therapies 2000 to 2020, that is 20 years. Now the first thing that I would like to point out is this publication has 14 authors representing 7 countries. We are talking about US FDA. Of course, USA is included in the authorship, but it includes 6 other countries from the European Union, but EME is not part of this. The second interesting part is who is the first author. The first author has 4 affiliations. Okay, his address for correspondence is Switzerland, but he is also associated with institutions in United States and in Germany. Okay, and what are these institutions? Both of them are what called as METRIC. And what does METRIC stand for? Meta Research Innovation Centers. Okay, I think this is very important about who has authored and who has worked on this. It is on metadata. They have previously reported data from 2000 to 2016. So 4 more years of addition has been in this publication, but those 4 years has significant, profound impact on what has been done earlier. The funding for this article was from Swiss Cancer League, University of Basel, and data was extracted from US FDA official website. Okay, so there should be no ambiguity or no doubt about what was the data. All trials have been described on the US FDA website as pivotal, main or primary. So again, those are important trials. And the trial's outcome was either overall survival, progression-free survival, tumor response or quality of life. All drug information has been again obtained from US FDA site, which is drugs at FDA, and statistics was done using R software. 145 novel cancer drugs for 156 indications, 190 clinical trials. 233 was the median number of participants in each trial. And if it was randomized trial, which was there only in less than 0.5%, 48%, the median number of participants in those randomized trials was 420. At the time of approval, what were the results available? Overall survival in 61%, progression-free survival in 59%, tumor response in 86%, quality of life in 25%. And in fact, the overall survival was the study's primary endpoint in only 14% of trials. And you know that statistics have to be calculated on the primary endpoint. So this is a very important point. In these 190 clinical trials, priority review was 82%. Orphan drug status was 68%. Accelerated approval 46%, and breakthrough therapy designation in 28%. Incidentally, this was a separate category created only in 2012. So obviously the number is less. And companion diagnostics. So drug approval from US FDA was based on 2 randomized trials in 7% of instances, on a single randomized trial in 49% of instances. Overall survival improved only in 1/4, 25%. Absolute median improvement in overall survival was 2.55 months. And we've heard so much since morning about these figures. Absolute median increase in progression-free survival, 3.3 months. Improvement in quality of life, 8 months. So what were the changes before 2016 and after 2016? After 2016, what increased was a number of approvals, special review process, first-line use, companion diagnostic, and trials reporting on overall survival, quality of life, and progression-free survival. What was decreased was the number of trials per approval. It came down to 1. And there was no change in that 14% where overall survival was the primary endpoint or number of participants per trial. So with this, I will close the summary and we can start the interview. So Chirag, thank you. I'm going to divide my questions into 4 parts. One is a little background on research. Second is questions pertaining to this specific publication. The third would be related to DCGI and the Indian process. And finally, I'll ask you some rapid fire questions where it's like yes, no answers, right? So I will start with the background questions first. When requested to become a PI or principal investigator for a new drug, where the sponsor is from abroad, what factors do you consider before accepting to be the PI?
So before I start answering the question, thank you very much for those kind words. That's first thing. Second thing is that disclaimer for me that I'm not a regulatory expert. I am 90% medical oncologist like all of you. I am 9% investigator, and the consulting and rest of the things is 1% of the activity which I am performing.
So now you can see that 1% makes him the expert as far as we are concerned.
So thanks to you. So now, so far as the request comes from an international sponsor for becoming the principal investigator, I look at the disease, its prevalence in our country, whether there is an unmet need in the area of that particular disease, and how the proposed clinical trial and the proposed drug is going to fill that unmet need, ease of the conduct of the trial, and relevance to me, my patient, as well as my country. These are the few things which I keep in account when I accept the trial. If one or more of these factors are not favorable, then I deny participating in that trial.
Right. Okay, next question is the value of being a PI. So let's say Uma is a PI in an international phase 3 randomized trial and I am not a PI. Now the trial is over. Do you think that being a PI, Uma has better understanding and insight into application of that drug in daily clinical practice?
Technically, yes. Yeah. So, being a PI in the trials of the new drug gives us the opportunity of utilizing that drug ahead of the peers, of the colleagues in the country. It gives us the first-hand experience of the benefits as well as the management of the toxicities of that drug. But having said that, of late, what I have been seeing is that in our WhatsApp group and our interaction in conferences and so on and so forth, there are many learned people sitting out here as well, who, even though not being a PI, are experts in that particular drug. But surely, being the PI gives us the opportunity of being master of that particular drug.
So these experts who may not be PIs are those who have actually read through the details of the supplementary data in addition to what is published,
Right.
and have read between the lines to understand the drug. That's what you're meaning.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Now sometimes the drug is approved in United States, is not yet submitted for approval in India, but the patient requires it. So this is like a name patient basis or P license basis. Have you had any experience of this?
Yeah. So the drugs are available depending on the programs of that particular company, or if the patient is willing to buy and pay for it. Patient either can do the process directly, or then there are some of the companies who are facilitating that process. So that process as such for the oncologist is simple, writing a very good summary justifying the utilization of that drug, emphasizing that there is no good alternative to that particular drug, and giving a prescription for that particular drug for that particular quantity. But taking that later, if the patient has to do the things himself or herself, patient has to go to various agencies in government, and patient has to write to that particular company who is manufacturing and exporting that company from abroad, and that is quite a process. That is difficult process, and unless guided by the Indian office of that company or one of the company who is facilitating this process, it is difficult for most of our patients.
Right, got it. Now let us say that US FDA has approved a drug, as has been mentioned in this study, and now subsequently they find that there is some data that questions the safety or the efficacy. How does US FDA respond to that?
So can you give an example?
So let's say bevacizumab has been given some indication, and now they find that no, it is not effective in this particular indication.
Okay. So I think that was the main part of this particular publication, that I will give a little twisted answer and then come back to the straight point. So who are the stakeholders in clinical trials? There are several stakeholders, and the regulatory authority is just one of the stakeholders. The others are the patient himself, who wants the miracle drug to cure his ailment, investigators like me and you, who want name, fame, money, want to have the authorship in the publication. The ethics committee are there. The media want to show that some new magic drug has available, or they want to do a bad publicity of the new things. Regulatory authority, as I said, the sponsors and the CRO. So these are all different stakeholders, and regulatory authority is just one of them. So the job of regulatory authority is to ensure that the safe and effective drug come to the patient at appropriate time, not too early, not too late. So the companies, the sponsor always have the pressure on the regulatory authority. The patient group have the pressure on the regulatory authority to see if there is a useful drug that should be available to the patients as early as possible, not to delay. But once it is available on the priority review basis that we will discuss in subsequent time, if it is found subsequently that the drug is not as good as it appeared in the early clinical trial, or it has some specific toxicities, then the regulatory authorities must ensure that it is withdrawn.
All right. And what is the black box warning that US FDA sometimes gives?
So it is popularly known as black box warning, but it is box warning to be sure, and that has to be there in the package insert of the drug details, and sometimes it is there on the packaging or bottling of the drug as well. So this is the warning that if not observed can pose some risk to the patient when it is not used appropriately.
Right. Now coming to another point, I believe that US FDA has opened some offices in India.
Yeah.
How do they do that? What authority do they have in India?
So again, not an expert, but I understand that our government has invited US FDA to open up the offices in our country. Now these offices are mainly not for facilitating the clinical trials or not for overseeing the clinical trials in our country. The US FDA office in our country is just ensuring that our companies who are making the drugs and exporting it to the USA are of adequate standard. They are not pushing the substandard drugs from our country to their country.
Right. Now, let us say that some drug has been approved by US FDA versus that same drug is now part of some official guidelines, let's say NCCN guidelines. Which one influences clinical practice in India more?
So, NCCN guideline, European guideline, and US FDA approval. So, of the three, I think I will give more weightage to the European guidelines, more conservative. US FDA guidelines under the pressure of the stakeholders which I just mentioned, and NCCN will want to list everything which the insurers are likely to approve in their working.
So each one is catering to their unique needs. Okay, now I'm moving to the next part, and that is questions regarding the manuscript. Okay, so the first question is, what do you think are the strengths and limitations of this publication?
So it's a wonderful study because it goes through every clinical trial published and taken from US FDA without missing any of the trial from 2000 to 2020 for a long time, right? Now, the limitation is that it encompasses all kinds of drugs, and the way the drugs are being developed has changed over last 2 decades, and that change has been very rapid. From cytotoxic chemotherapy, we have moved to targeted therapy, then now we have moved to immunotherapy, and now we are seeing that phase 3 trials are having lower number of patients, and phase 1 clinical trials typically had 30 to 40 patients, or sometimes are having 100 patients, right? So early phase trial are more carefully performed by the companies. So these are the few things. The second thing is that for the comparative trials, randomized trials, we have very good comparator to the test drug.
Sure.
So the two results can be compared, but 52% of the trials were non-randomized trial. So in the single arm study, there is no comparator. And for comparison, they have to look at the historical data, which is not the ideal thing to do. So these are some of the limitations.
So you already answered my question is why sponsors are submitting data to regulatory authorities even before the overall survival comes into the picture, and you answered that. So we'll move on to the next question. Does the working of US FDA differ from the working of the EMA in the European Union?
So, as I just said, Europeans are more conservative, but the orphan drug status, the accelerated approval, priority review, everything is there with European agencies as well under some different name.
Right. Now, if you look at the, I'm going to while we are talking about the manuscript, I'm going to take the point example from somewhere else. If you look at the mRNA vaccine and COVID, tons and tons of information was given by Pfizer and the other company to the US FDA. But when more than 1,000 investigators or scientists requested for this data to be made public, US FDA is very cagey, and they are saying that we will only give out 50 pages or 500 pages of data every month. And that means that the safety data and efficacy data that we will get will be in 2070, right? So why is it that patients continue to have only limited information about the way that the FDA has given the approval and what are the benefits that come out of these cancer drugs?
So I will come back to this example a second later. Okay. Let us take an example of bevacizumab in breast cancer. So based on the trial of bevacizumab, the drug was approved, the ECOG trial, and it was shown that the PFS was double, and there was overall survival advantage as well. Thank you. But in each of the subsequent clinical trials, like Avado trial and Ribbon trial and so on and so forth, the PFS difference kept on shrinking and the overall survival difference went away. So US FDA revoked the approval of bevacizumab, and they have done that for a number of other drugs. To give another example is olaratumab for soft tissue sarcoma, right? So this tumor was not emergency. Breast cancer or soft tissue sarcoma was not emergency. So they allowed the drug to be given for that particular indication and kept on looking at the data very closely. Now, COVID was the global emergency, right? So they rushed the approval of those vaccines and kept on scrutinizing the data and
in real time, on a dynamic basis.
On a dynamic basis, and made it available to the people as the data kept on accumulating.
Right. Okay. So next question. What is the problem if the novel drug study has tumor response as the primary endpoint? Yeah, though it is going down between 2000 before and 2016 and after, it's going down. But tumor response is a very poor surrogate endpoint. Do you think that's a problem when US FDA approves on this?
Yes. So you said it is going down, but I say it's not going down.
Okay.
For the targeted therapy, molecular targeted therapy, in phase 1 clinical trial, it is shown that it is excellent tumor response rate. Then the drug is approved with the accelerated approval. Right. So the company should have 2 trials together, or have 1 trial which may be adaptive trial design, where phase 1 is automatically followed by maybe phase 3, because in the trial, if in phase 1 molecular targeted therapy, if 70, 80, 100 patients have been enrolled, there is no need to perform the phase 2 clinical trial. We can straightway go to phase 3 clinical trial, where the primary endpoint has to be survival. So the gold standard is survival, longer life, and the other important point is the happy life, quality of life, right? So ultimately, the approval may be based on one of the surrogate endpoint, and overall response rate is one of the surrogate endpoint. It is one of the weak surrogate endpoint. The stronger may be PFS, maybe PFS, or in adjuvant study it may be DFS, it may be IDFS, or whatever. They are all surrogate endpoints, not proven consistently.
Right.
So based on the surrogate endpoint, if the trial is approved, there has to be mechanism. There is a mechanism. Every time that is being stringently followed or not, that's a different thing, and
sure,
there are examples of that mechanism not being followed. But always, okay, there is an on-ramp and off-ramp effect of accelerated approval, publication of October 22 in NEJM by the members of ODEC of US FDA,
right,
and that is showing the mechanism, how they are performing. So on an average, the initial approval and the final approval or disapproval, the time is approximately 3 years. That is not bad.
Right. So you are saying that if there is more robust data in the earlier phase of clinical trials, there is no need to continue with large phase 3 trials as we used to do in the past.
No, phase 3 clinical trials are required.
No, a large number.
Not for the approval.
Okay,
Not
not,
for the
for approval. Fine, fine. But the other major contention I have is these different pathways which are trying to compromise on the robustness of the approval process. And that includes accelerated approval, orphan drug status, breakthrough status. What do you have your opinion on that?
So these are all the mechanisms devised by the other stakeholders in addition to the regulatory authorities. So each stakeholder will try to influence the regulatory authorities, and ultimately they are coming under the influence at some point in time.
So now I'm coming to the third part, and that is questions about DCGI and how things are happening in India. So do you think DCGI functions differently from US FDA as far as new cancer drug trial approval is concerned?
So I have been involved in trials since 1995 as investigator, and then I joined Quintiles in 1998 for 2.5 years and about 3-4 years as consultant. And over all these years, what I have seen is that we have been learning. And in process of learning, we make some mistakes. We learn from those mistakes. On the whole, we keep on learning from US FDA, and the whole world is learning from US FDA, so that is not bad. Our regulators want to do the things in Indian way, but the lessons are learned from US FDA.
So while we are on this topic, I'm going to skip the sequence of the questions and go. There is one particular thing where DCGI has done something on their own, totally different from everywhere else in the world, and that is the no-fault compensation that clinical trials are giving. What is your opinion about that?
So earlier I mentioned about the stakeholders, right? So public, a patient welfare group, media, they are the strong stakeholders in our country. They played some games sometimes in 2011, 2012, and because of that, as a knee-jerk reaction, the DCGI passed the rule that every death in clinical trial has to be compensated irrespective of the reason, right? But if you look at the current new drug rule of March 2019, yes, before 4 years, there has been a mechanism of reporting from the investigator to the ethics committee, investigator to the sponsor, investigator to the regulatory authorities, and interaction between all these four different players. Ultimately, it goes to subject expert committee with the observations of the investigator of the ethics committee as well as the sponsor. And the subject expert committee decides whether it was related or not related and the quantum of compensation. And now we have a transparent, very straightforward formula of that quantum of compensation. That also is sometimes too much, but that is getting streamlined in last few years.
The 2 points I want to make. One is that when you talked about stakeholders, the one that persuaded the Indians to change was not patients, but NGOs who are supposedly looking after the interest of patients for whatever reason. And the second is that we have our very own expert, Dr. Hemant Malhotra, who played a very significant contribution to making a just and fair compensation formula. If he was not there, the compensation would be 10 times or 50 times what has come here, right? So has the process of DCGI changed over 10 years? Obviously it has changed, but has it changed for the better or for worse?
So they have very good processes, but my personal experience is that in the stipulated timelines, as per the new drug rules, that machinery doesn't work. They are sometimes taking a very long time.
Very long time.
So that is the problem with that machinery.
But I have insight into the transparency of the process, and I think that has changed significantly.
Absolutely.
There is no third party allowed to enter the DCGI's office. Everything is put up on the website. The sequence of the discussions, who are the subject expert members, which day of the month this discussion is to be happened, and the minutes of the meeting as well as the approval comes up within 24 to 48 hours. I think that is a big transparency.
One small issue where we need to improve is, there are about 10 or 11 subject experts.
Right.
and not sure whether all of them come prepared for the meeting or not. That is first thing. And second thing is, in that particular meeting on that particular day, each trial, clinical trial, or ultimately when it comes to approval,
Yes.
the sponsor, the companies are just given 15 to 20 minutes for the presentation. Sometimes that is too short. They cannot justify their point in
Yes.
those 15 to 20 minutes.
Understood, accepted. Has anybody here as a PI? Oh, yes. Naresh, can you come to the mic, please?
I can't be there.
No, come to the
in
mic.
your place.
Yeah, go
okay.
ahead.
So, first comment to the last point, that is the 15 to 20 minutes. I think the DCGI has reversed the mechanism now, that they first ask you to go to the individual hospital PI ethics committee, present the trial there, and if at least the one ethics committee need to give the approval, then only the DCGI will accept your proposal to go ahead or not. That is one thing. The second, my question is to Dr. Chirag Desai, regarding this death compensation. I'm not very sure, but I believe that now even if there is a progressive disease leading to the death, that also need to be compensated in the clinical trial. That is the question to you. And another is regarding your comment of the European guideline versus NCCN. My experience and observation is that including the routine clinical practice, including all our presentation in the Indian scenario, we every time make the summary at the NCCN guidelines, including the various consumer fora, empanelment agencies like the ESI, ECHS, CGHS, other empanelment agencies, they ask us for the NCCN guidelines. Thank you.
Glamour.
So my question is that regarding the compensation of the death
Yeah.
because of the progressive disease in clinical trial.
I will come back to that. But so far as NCC is concerned, it is glamour. It is nothing else. It is more glamorous. Right?
So they have wrongly asked for NCCN. That is what he's saying.
Yeah.
There is no scientific substance
Absolutely.
in why NCCN guidelines should be used for reimbursement in India.
And coming back to 2 points which you raised. The first was the approval by at least one ethics committee, right? I am a member of an ethics committee as well, and I have a form. It is 4 or 5 ethics committees in Ahmedabad. Now, if you look at the ethics committee obligations developed in last few years, a lot of responsibility is being passed on from various stakeholders to the ethics committee, and these poor guys, they are not expert in those particular clinical trial. If I am sitting on the ethics committee and a cardiology trial is there, I am not a cardiologist, right? So ethics committee is given a lot of responsibility, unnecessary sometimes.
But there need to be at least one subject expert. If let's
Exactly. Agreed.
limit ourselves to the oncology,
Agreed.
at least one
Agreed.
medical oncologist
But
need to
the
be
point
there.
which I am trying to make is that ethics committee should not be given so much of responsibility. There is a responsibility taken by the regulatory authority, which sometimes they are passing on to the ethics committees.
But that's the scenario as on today.
We will discuss in the panel discussion.
And death compensation?
Death compensation. So if the sponsor, the investigator and the ethics committee can sufficiently show the evidence that it is because of progression and not because of the drug, it is not required to be compensated.
No, my question is very specific. Death due to progression of the disease in clinical trial.
It is not required to be compensated.
So there will be a separate ethics committee decision and a DCGI decision.
Yeah.
If both say it is not because of something wrong that went in part of the trial, it may not be given compensation. That is the theory.
Correct.
Whether it works in practice or not is a different issue.
So let's say very clearly there is a phase 3 randomized trial, there is a control arm and there is a clinical trial arm. And because of the clinical trial arm patient enrollment, there is a progressive disease which is less than the ultimately because of the control arm, non-inferiority of the trial ultimately being proven. And there is a progressive disease. Why patients should not be compensated?
That's a different question. You are asking about regulations. The regulations don't insist on that.
Correct, yeah.
So I was going to ask any in the audience as a principal investigator, has anybody faced the US FDA audit? Yeah? 2 people have faced. So my question to you is, what do you think? US FDA should be allowed to audit trials in India at Indian centers like these principal investigators or not? And if I'll ask each of you to make a comment on what was your experience also.
At the time of starting the clinical trial, we are signing that we will allow any foreign agency to come and audit our trials. So when we are writing that in agreement,
There is no problem.
Exactly.
So how can I start with you? What has been your experience?
In contrary, it has been quite good. I have been audited both by EMEA and the US FDA and DCJ, all the three. So actually,
And you were made comfortable, you were not, they were not
actually,
hostile?
Mr. Scott, who was a well-known name in US FDA at that point, came into, and my audit was over in 3 days in contrast to 6 days which he had taken. And this was for a bioequivalent study for a temozolomide drug.
Fantastic.
And he was quite supportive. So what I feel, I've gone through both the European and the US FDA, they look at your knowledge of the PI about the trial. That first 1 to 2 hours that a PI spends with the agency differentiates what they want to look.
Okay.
Then they look at the faulty things. They're very clear, they made the notes, they work very meticulously. You should not falsify data. So once if anyone falsifies the data, then he or she is a problem.
Trouble.
If that is not done, even if there's a mistakes, they actually support you at the end. I've seen that. If the intent is clear, you are knowledgeable, they give you even advices off the record not to do this in the next time.
All right.
So my experience with both of them has been excellent, actually.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Govind,
I've had US FDA inspection for one study, and it was a 7-day inspection at my site. Again, as Sahu said, don't try to falsify, don't try to make corrections. And the initial part of the interview is the most important thing. So they first talk to the PI and then the rest of the team. And in fact, the US FDA, the sponsor were more scared than the site that was being audited.
Right.
And he said that this is one of the best documentations I have seen so far.
excellent. So, though the inspectors start with the PI first, they also have similar interviews with other members of your team which are independent on a one-to-one basis. And there also they try and corroborate what you have said and what they have understood. If both of you have understood the right thing, then there is no problem, right?
And that is about the processes as well.
Yes.
If I say as a PI that we do this activity according to this process or this SOP, they will verify it, they will cross-check it with the subordinate staff.
Okay. And the documentation.
And the documentation,
Right,
absolutely.
right. So, as far as DCJ is concerned, my last question to you is, as a PI, over your distinguished career, what changes you have found while you are conducting clinical trials?
So, if you look at the endpoint that they have been accepting with the change in the kind of the drugs that are being developed right now, they are more lenient in giving initial approval. They do require the corroborative data about the overall survival or quality of life, but they have been lenient in approving the trials and approving the drugs based on the initial small data.
No, I meant your experience as a PI while conducting trial. Has your experience changed? Have the trials become more difficult to do, easier to do? What happens about your support staff? Do you have to have more resources in it?
So it is not because of DCGI requirement, but it is because of the sponsors passing the buck to the CRO and CRO passing the buck to 5 vendors to do the particular job, and that is making the life of the PI as well as the site staff more difficult.
Understood. So, we should be charging more for that.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, now the last part is the rapid fire yes or no type of questions. First questions is, results of this manuscript, were they expected or surprising?
Not very surprising.
Not very surprising. Has your faith in US FDA increased, remained the same or decreased after this publication?
I think it has remained same.
Okay. Would you now personally do a more robust scrutiny of the data even though US FDA has approved a new drug?
We all are doing in this type of conferences.
Yeah, and
We should
of course,
continue doing
We
that.
should continue to do
Yeah.
that. Will the median number of patients enrolling in future regulatory trials reduce, remain the same or increase?
So it depends on the kind of drug that is being utilized. It may reduce or it may remain same.
Okay. Many a times we are always worried about or questioning why overall survival data is not there, why overall survival data is not there. Could it be that overall survival is not so important? And this is, with asking feedback from Amol and others. because overall survival is also impacted by subsequent therapies.
In a way, yes. But ultimately, the clinical trial without overall survival data is good for initial approval, not for the permanent approval.
Understood. If the US FDA has given a breakthrough designation, do you think DCGI gives a faster approval in India?
There is no reason why not. They
But
should.
have they done that, or you don't think they have done?
I don't think they have done.
Okay, they have not. So thank you very much, Chirag. I have finished all my questions. I may have exceeded the time because I was not looking at the clock. But this has been excellent, and I would like the audience to, thank Chirag in the usual way. Now, Chirag, you have to wait back as part of the, panel, and I hand over to Amish to do the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think one of the very crisp interview, sir and Chirag bhai, very simple, straightforward questions and equally straightforward answers, I feel gives us much clarity on how to look at these approvals. I think, and we will go it forward. Can I have my first slide, please? Okay. So before that, I'll invite, yes. Okay, I have in my, yes. So Dr. Amol Akhade is our first panelist. Amol. वो slide वापस चला गया, panelist वाला. I have here list.
Yes, Babu.
Dr. Stalin Chaudhary Bala, Dr. Suman Gupta, Dr. Vamshi. Vamshi is here, I think he's gone. Dr. Uma Dangi. Next name सुना हुआ है, Dr. Chirag Desai. हाँ, he's here.
बुझा लेता हूँ.
And Dr. Bharat Chauhan. Okay, so I think, okay, perfect. We have the slides. Can I have the next slide, please? And the next. Yeah, I can replace this. We have set this. Okay. So I want each and every panelist, except Dr. Chirag Desai, to tell me in 1 to 2 sentences, what do you think of this paper? Just one line, after reading and after understanding the discussion, what do you think about this paper? Start from Bharat. 1 to 2 lines.
Sir, seriousness of disease is being shown by FDA. That is why if you see many drug approvals has been given on single trials, and QOL they have not seen, and many RCTs were not there while
So
while
they were
approving.
more serious or they are less serious now?
They were not serious. Basically, the disease was serious. I was just
They
saying
were not serious, but the disease was
serious and
Okay.
taking a toll on them.
Perfect. Dr. Uma?
I think this was an eye-opener for me, so honestly speaking, because, it really shows, you really have to scrutinize each trial, even if the FDA approves it, you have to really go through it in detail and figure out what all, what all has gone through before the approval has come.
Okay. Dr. Stalin?
I accept the comments of Dr. Uma that we need to, whenever the individual trial is published and the drug approval is there, we need to go deeper into that, analyze and make it into a clinical practice rather than
Deeper
simply
into
accepting it.
Okay. Dr. Sumant?
Sir, I'll say that being a newer branch with many medicines, so these kind of papers were going to come. Some mistakes and some good things happened. So I think it's an eye-opener, and I hope it is for the betterment.
Excellent. Dr. Amol? I think you will not mince around the words.
This was expected, and as Dr. Parikh sir has shown in the paper, that there were 14 authors, out of which 13 were from the Western European countries. And nowadays, there is a lot of so-called movement against the US FDA and their approvals. And this is one of the part of that movement. The movement, I will say, there is a movement for optimal drug dosages. There is a movement for counteracting the US FDA's monopoly and the approvals that are given by them, and which unfortunately or fortunately goes from US to Europe to other parts of the world. So there is a strong movement against that, and this paper is part of that movement.
Okay, perfect. So on that, I would again start from that side because I want Amol to be last. If US FDA has given either standard approval, accelerated approval, or a breakthrough designation, Bharat, are you compelled to offer this drug to patients in your day-to-day practice because it is FDA approval of some form? If none of these approvals exist, that means, are you afraid to use this drug on your patient outside the setting of clinical trial? Bharat?
Sir, approvals gives you enough confidence and evidence too that 14, 15
I'm asking,
authors.
are you compelled and are you afraid? You need to answer those two questions.
I'm not afraid. I'll use a drug.
But are you compelled?
Yes,
Say
yes.
You are compelled.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So Uma, add on to that, Topaz 1, you don't agree with the results. I just is not good enough for my patients, assuming, you have reached that conclusion. But are you compelled to offer that combination to all patients of biliary tract cancers?
So I won't say I'm compelled, but I would probably discuss it because, for the simple reason that many patients will go on Google, check and come to you, and they might ask you upfront themselves. So I will talk to them about it, but I don't feel compelled to use it.
Okay. Chirag bhai, compelled and fear, afraid.
So compelled. So to that, what I will say is that I will not look at just US FDA or for that matter DCGI approval. I will look at the options that the patient is having as per any suitable guideline, right? And out of that guideline, I will select the appropriate drug for my patient after discussing with the patient. So that is one thing. And second thing is that if it is the off-label drug, in 2008 we had done an ICON program in Ahmedabad, and where one of the topic was drug without approval, right? So paclitaxel is not having approval in angiosarcoma, but I will always use paclitaxel in angiosarcoma. So I am not afraid of using off-label drug.
Agreed. Dr. Stalin, compelled?
Compelled if the approval is not there. So especially majority of the times we are not going to use, at least in the first line setting. In the later lines, even though we know that efficacy is there and based upon our colleagues' experience or our personal experience, so there it doesn't matter. But majority of the times in the first line, in the metastatic setting or in the adjuvant setting, approval need to be there.
Need to be there to offer. Sumant?
I'll say that if we used to the both of these were compelled and afraid, then we are losing our clinical science. So I think the clinician.
Sumant, if there is approval by FDA, are you compelled to offer to patients?
I am not compelled.
No. Okay. Right. Amol?
So I will answer the afraid part. If there is no approval, I am afraid to use the drug because for me at least some approval has to be there before I use it. But if there is an approval, am I compelled? No, I'm not compelled to offer it. I may discuss it, but I'm not compelled.
Okay. Just on this to complete, Parikh sir, if you can come on the mic, if any of these approval gets withdrawn, what are we compelled to do with the patient who are already on those drugs by law?
Oh, that's very simple. By law.
By
so
law.
I will answer the first part and then by law. The first part is, I will see whether the patient is responding or not. If the patient is responding and tolerating well, I would have no scientific hesitation in continuing with it.
Okay. So give an example, PARP inhibitors are being looked at upon by FDA as causing more deaths than the placebo, and that's the reason they are bringing tighter and tighter restrictions. Your patient so far is doing very well. You don't know, but in future will develop MDS and die or not.
Very true. So this is similar to the use of darbepoetin in cancer-related anemia and the risk of thrombosis.
Correct.
So I will discuss with the patient.
Right.
That this is the risk that has come up. This is just like in a clinical trial, we
You
have to
would
take
do
a
that.
revised consent. I would do that.
But by law, if the patient is doing well, you are not compelled to withdraw from that
by
patient.
law, in my best judgment, if the patient deserves to continue, that is what I need to do.
Perfect. Okay. Okay. So, if I can have the slide, two
One
slides.
question, in
Yes.
that case, so if the approval is withdrawn, do we need to inform to the patient that the approval is withdrawn
Yes.
before continuing the medication?
So that's a good question. The approval is withdrawn by US FDA. DCGI has not withdrawn the approval, then I don't need to inform. If the approval is withdrawn in India by the Indian Drug Authority, then I have to tell.
Okay, perfect. So, we talk so much, and Amol, as I love him for not mincing around with the words and adjectives, he used the word called monopoly. And let's look at FDA's some restrictions. In 1906, FDA was founded, which we all know, but there are some landmark events. In 1938, FDA was mandated to check if the drug is safe or not. That's all. In 1968, whether drug is safe and effective. 1980s, during HIV outbreak, priority review was initiated out of helplessness. 1992, accelerated approval process started. 2012, breakthrough designation, as Parikh sir has mentioned in his slide. Now, this is some fact which I did not know. Dr. Vincent Rajkumar, in his institutional video, he has given these two facts. One, US FDA by law can't do cost-benefit analysis when they are deciding on approval or rejection. And second, US FDA by law can only look at efficacy of the drug. They are not allowed to look at the magnitude of benefit, and it is not under their purview because they say yes or no. After this, I understand where FDA is coming from, honestly speaking. I just would like, any one of you who is doing, Amol, does these two statements try to change your perception about the monopolistic attitude of FDA, US FDA?
No, in fact, this reinstate what we are trying to say, that US FDA is not supposed to do cost-effect analysis, that is expected, and they are not supposed to comment upon the magnitude of benefit also. Then you have to see, there are two aspects of it. One is, what is the nexus between US FDA and the pharma industry? There is a study, there is a very clear-cut study in which they have shown that how many of the US FDA personals, once they complete their tenure, go and join the pharma industry, and it has been shown that at least 30 to 55% of them, the percentage varies, goes and join the pharma industry. Second, if you go and look at the sponsors of FDA at various activities, you will see that it is there officially on their website, that a lot of sponsorship to the FDA comes from the pharma industry. So basically, it is like a bad marriage or whatever kind of marriage, and they are like husband and wife. Whatever they show to the world, they are inside husband and wife. So
Can I
probably
respond to that?
Yes, sir.
One is, FDA is following the rules, the legislation, the regulation that the government has made.
Correct.
FDA has not decided, okay, I will do this and I will not do it. It is like a law that is there. The second part is about FDA personnel retiring and then becoming consultants for the industry. That is there in every industry. If you look at the maximum number of governors in our country, they are either senior officials in the IAS, or they are senior ambassadors, or they are senior generals and admirals in the armed forces. But they have expertise that they have gained while doing their work, and after retirement, they are sharing that expertise. They are telling the pharma company, this is how the FDA wants you to do things, so do it properly.
So I
that
think
raises the question about conflict of interest.
But your point,
Conflict of interest is only if both are being done at the same time. If I'm working in US FDA and I'm still advising the pharma company, that is conflict of interest. Once I've retired from FDA, then I can do whatever I want. There's no conflict
So-
after that.
Potentially that-
Amol, I think your point is very valid. It is taken. Sir's point is by law what Sir said, but your point is valid and taken. Chirag bhai.
Amish, 3 points quickly I want to make.
Yeah.
The first thing, what Amol said, I just said in modest word that various stakeholders who are influencing the decision of US FDA, and pharma companies is one of those stakeholders, important stakeholder. The other thing is that US FDA is giving pre-submission counseling. So the US FDA people only are offering the counseling before submitting the clinical trial to the US FDA. So there can be a conflict of interest at that point in time, right? So, and the final thing is that cost benefit analysis is the job in USA of the insurance companies, and in Europe it is government as well as the organizations like NICE. It is not the regulatory authority who is doing the cost benefit analysis.
I think I would like to say a little off the grid here. We all will be very stupid if we don't understand the influence of various stakeholders over each other. I think the entire advertisement industry of India would be shut down if we strictly follow, what we are saying about that. This 3 slides I have taken from Parikh sir. Sir has already shown about this. Just wanted to highlight what Parikh sir has highlighted. OS was the primary endpoint only in 14 trials. And the various priority accelerated approval for 46% of patients, and OS improved in 25% by 2.55 months. Okay. So, Chirag bhai, what is the issue? Very short. What is the issue? Is process faulty? Is process wrong? Or is this the right path for oncology?
So for oncology, we want to have more drugs quickly, that is for sure. But the process described here is incomplete. The complete process is in the paper which I had given to you in the afternoon.
Right.
That it has to be off-ramp mechanism that has to work.
Okay. Stalin, what do you think? Is US FDA becoming more lax, easy to deal with, or they are just, following the need of the hour?
Possibly need of the hour,
Possibly the need.
but they need to be more stricter.
They need to be more stricter. Uma, your this thing, and then Parikh sir.
So I think certainly there are ways we can improve. I mean, it requires improvement. But looking at OS as an endpoint only in 25% of the trials is a little, 14% of the trials is a little shocking, and only 2.5 months. But having said that, what I will say is that in oncology, where there are multiple lines of therapy, sometimes the overall survival, or that which is the classical endpoint that we look at, may take a little longer. And when you want a drug which is effective to come into the market, you do use surrogate endpoints and give approval. So I won't really cross it off completely.
You won't cross it off completely. It all depends indication to indication wise, right?
Yes.
Bharat, what Uma said. Sorry, Parikh sir first.
No, no,
Sorry,
you
Stan.
cut
Okay.
it.
Bharat, in ALK positive patients, we have crizotinib, ceritinib, alectinib. We have brigatinib, you can want to add. Now lorlatinib comes. We have good data with these things. For lorlatinib, would you accept the accelerated approval? Because it's one more Me Too drug, unless and until it shows some, like Uma said, our patient needs little better drug. Would you accept accelerated approval, or would you wait for proper overall survival data?
Proper OS.
Proper OS.
Yeah.
Anybody in the panel think that they would accept accelerated approval? No. So delta of the magnitude of the benefit doesn't make any. Assuming alectinib is say 40 months PFS and lorlatinib comes up with 60 months PFS, won't you accept the accelerated approval there?
Yes, in
You
that
would.
case, yes, definitely, because
So
it
there is-
has, by and large, has shown its efficacy in the second line setting, even in the third line setting. So we know that the drug is effective. We know that the drug is effective against various ALK resistance mutations. And if such a drug has shown its efficacy in the first line, Definitely I would add.
Definitely. So I feel that why blame NCCN when we are not able to decipher how to look at the data? Parikh sir.
You want to go ahead
Yeah.
first?
Yeah.
Please.
So I will like to answer the previous question, whether the process is faulty or the process, the system is not faulty. It is the people who are implementing that system are faulty. And if I say, there is a, last year, there is a lot of ruckus in US Parliament about the accelerated approvals and the Jamela created by that. And they have made a modifications,
Yes.
and which have been published in Lancet recently.
Yes.
And what they have said, now there is a definitive time limit in which after getting an accelerated approval, you have to do confirmatory trial. Plus, you have to keep on updating US FDA every 3 months about what is happening with the confirmatory trial. This was there previously on paper, but was not implemented.
No. So
And
Amol, even January 2023, the legislation has recommended
Yes.
FDA to ask for confirmatory trial. And the next line says how much FDA would implement needs to be seen.
So that's what I'm saying. The laws are there in place. It is the people who are, the process is not faulty. It is the intention of the process is correct, that the cancer patient should get the better drugs faster.
Correct.
If lorlatinib is showing 61 months PFS, I will like to use it for my patient, the patient is affording. But the company should do the confirmatory trial
Absolutely
within
right.
a certain
So
period.
Amol has
and that
hit
is
the
what is
nail.
exactly.
Amish,
Yes,
can
sir.
I say now?
Yes,
This
yes,
is
sir.
the right time for me to say, actually. And I will start by contradicting myself and supporting exactly what Chirag and Amol has said. When I do workshops on clinical trials, my topic is, controversies. And I will give two examples. Unfortunately, these examples are not from oncology. But I'll give two examples of how the individuals are subverting the process of US FDA. In one trial, both the trials examples are for diabetes mellitus. In one trial, after the enrollment was completed, after the interim analysis was done, they decided to have a modification in the protocol. And what was the modification? That the final evaluation of hemoglobin A1C will be done at 4 weeks instead of 6 weeks after the last dose of the drug. The interim analysis had shown that if the evaluation is done at 6 weeks, it would be same in both the arms. So they hastened to do the evaluation at 4 weeks instead of 6 weeks. Subversion of the process by individuals. In the other trial, again for diabetes, after enrollment, global enrollment was completed, after 600 patients were in the trial, the sponsor proposed to interchange primary endpoint with secondary endpoint. And again, their interim analysis had shown that the p-value will be significant only on the secondary endpoint, and therefore they did that. And in these both instances are classic example of how the process is subverted by individuals.
Correct. Absolutely right.
Sir, but I have a question, sir. In such situations where the protocol is entirely amendment, it has to go through the ethics committee again for approval, isn't it?
Yes.
So,
So you are right. But when FDA approval is given, tell me which ethics committee will say no. So again, I must, why I know this, because I was a member of the ethics committee. And I was the sole dissenter to refuse to allow them in our center.
Okay, perfect. So let's move forward. Clinical benefit for any drug.
Sorry, can I add the point?
Yes, Dr. Somani.
There is a similar example in the oncology also. There was a trial by the J&J of the erythropoietin to show the non-inferiority in the certain malignancy, in the breast cancer patient. And it was the last trial of the more than 1,000 patients globally. They could not prove it. So they extended the number of the patients.
Right. I think take-home message is that we have to be smarter and we have to empower ourselves with more knowledge to understand these things, especially when the delta is too meager for us to change our standard of practice. So, I'm just now coming to a very important point. When people said this manuscript is an eye-opener, I wanted to give some other perspective. Clinical benefit of any drug has only two predefined approved endpoints in last 30 to 40 years. Overall survival should be better and patient reported outcome should be better. There was no third parameter which was accepted so far till all these other categories came. So now let's look at, examples, few examples. If this would have been followed, overall survival and patient reported QOL or outcomes, how many drugs would have reached market maybe 5 years, 10 years later? So we all know in 1998, Dr. Drucker in phase 1 report said that 49% there was a major molecular response after using imatinib in phase 1 study. Within just 3 years, imatinib got full approval. It is not an conditional or accelerated approval within 2001. Alectinib story, let's see. And here I would like Amol to start instead of others. FDA approved alectinib for second line ALK positive in 2006, and that's how they got. But alectinib also got the accelerated approval for a first line treatment based on PFS data. Okay, it was not based on OS data. Now look at the PFS difference. 10.9 months versus 34.8 months, the delta. Niche, there is an overall survival difference which is statistically significant in the global arm, but it is not that great a difference. And if you see JLX survival, the curves are almost superimposing. Okay. Let me start with Sumant and then come to Sumant. Has been silent and nodding his head. Sumant, if you are supposed to give approval to alectinib, and there is a strictest criteria, OS के बगैर तो मैं approval दूंगा ही नहीं. Based on this survival graph, would you have given approval to alectinib? No.
We would have missed it.
Then do you think that we would have missed, slide please. Do you think that we would have missed 10.9 versus 34.3 years patient lives on alectinib without any progression, continues normal life? Isn't it a crime?
True. Absolutely. So basically it boils down to that oncology or cancer is a disease where we have to take more risks.
Where we have to take more risk. I'm talking of Chirag bhai, the process, and then Amol. Faulty process or manipulated, whatever way you look at the JLX survival data and you look at the PFS delta.
So the gold standard endpoints are the two which you just mentioned. I also mentioned in my interview that overall survival and quality of life, right? But if you look at the ALK story only, the initial approval of crizotinib was based on phase 1 data, right? Ceritinib was phase 3 data comparing with chemotherapy, right? But any drug coming after that has to be based on a phase 3 clinical trial. So it was there for lorlatinib as well as for alectinib. It was there, and it showed excellent improvement in the progression-free survival. But it has yet to show the improvement in the overall survival. So it is not standing the test of time of showing overall survival advantage.
No.
Listen to me.
Chirag bhai, that's not the question. And we have only 7 to 8 minutes. I would request you to answer. If accelerated approval concept would not have been there in this world, given to us by FDA, would we have missed approval of alectinib?
Absolutely.
That is bottom
Correct.
line what I wanted. Amol, you have anything else other than what I have said? Then you add. Otherwise, let's move forward.
Accelerated approval is not wrong. What is wrong is that the confirmatory trial results and the subsequent the change of the so-called approval, that is not happening. That means when you come to know that the OS between alectinib and crizotinib is same, then at least it should be mentioned that in whatever guidelines or whatever FDA approval notes that both these drugs are similar, even though one is showing better PFS. That means on progression, even if you use the other drug, the results are same. So that will be a better information to the patient.
Correct.
That is what is not happening.
Perfect. Let's take one more example. Okay. In 2003, 2 phase 2 studies, small phase 2 studies, accelerated approval only on response rate for Velcade or bortezomib. Okay. And in 2012, every indication in multiple myeloma has a full approval for the use of bortezomib. So my question is that 2003 to 2012 or say 2010, if you would have waited for OS data, in 7 years, how many patients we would have missed out giving bortezomib? And we all love that drug. Very easy to give, very effective, patient is very happy. You know, within 2 cycles, everything starts dropping. Suddenly the confidence of the patient also increases of that. So again, as I said, that somewhere these things help. And this was one thing which I feel, what Dr. Chirag Bhai gave me this NEJM article, the on and off ramps of oncology accelerated approval. Thing I take home from this is that the moment you get accelerated approval, the pharmaceutical company should have initiated the confirmatory trial. And this is how I have interpreted, because we don't have time. If you have initiated already the confirmatory trial, the further full approval will take only 3.2 to 3.5 years. If you have planned but not initiated, it will take 5 years. And if you have not even planned, it will take 7 years. And company would continue to earn for that 7 years. Now let's look at in 2022, withdrawals. Cancer accelerated approvals finally resulted in withdrawal, and we all know that ODAC committee in 2021 had rejected 6 indications for immunotherapy, out of which 2 are outrightly rejected and 4 they have still given conditional rejection. This is something where we have to be very careful about it. This is one very interesting, the last part. And Amol, Ireza or Jeftinib was approved as an accelerated approval for monotherapy for non-small cell lung cancer after platinum and docetaxel failure. It remained in the market as accelerated approval for 9 good years. People didn't make any hawa because it was a cheaper drug, or you also use this based on these approval? Stalin.
Actually, everyone has forgotten with the advent of testing EGFR in the first line and using it in the first line. So everyone has forgotten that the drug has been got an accelerated approval to be used after docetaxel.
Okay, perfect.
Can I make a point?
Yes, please.
See, whenever we are giving these examples, we are trying to compare, say, this happened with imatinib, this happened with Jeftinib. We are comparing blockbuster drugs, and let me tell, behind every imatinib, there are 10 other Me Too drugs which probably are not good enough. Say like nilotinib, dasatinib doesn't have any OS advantage. Or for that matter, behind every bortezomib, there is ixazomib or other myeloma drugs or selinexor, the newer myeloma drugs, which are not having that robust effect. So just because there are 4 or 5 blockbuster drugs who have done well, we cannot let the other 40, 45 not so good drugs to just go on without the scrutiny. The process has to be followed.
Correct. No, you are absolutely right. So I think a bottom line we all agree is that the process is with the good intent. How it is being tweaked and followed, it all depends, and it's on us also not to blindly accept anything. And as Dr. Stalin said, Parikh sir, I wanted to ask you, because you were part of Ireza trial when the global Ireza drug was withdrawn, and suddenly there was an Asian subset came and the entire story came back. Do you think at that time did the law help you, or it was just by sheer luck by chance?
No, I think it was based on science. And the science was pharmacogenomic. And today we talk about pharmacogenomic variations, and why we want to do molecular testing in our population is different from Ashkenazi Jews or from Latinos is because of this. So even that time when IRISA was being studied, we found when we had our internal discussion among the principal investigators, we found that our patient had significant benefit where the Caucasians were not having benefit. And then the discussion was to try and find out what is the reason. And it started with Asian women, non-smokers, which was the clinical features, like we checked for immune checkpoint inhibitors, clinical features. And then ultimately the exact molecular aberration was identified.
Right, great. Okay. So, yes, sir.
So I think what Purvish said was right. We were also part of this, and we had 110 patients from India, and we were discussing and found that our patients were doing better. One of the things in this trial, Dr. Nick Thatcher was the PI, was that the Indians were clubbed with Caucasians. That was the biggest fault that was done. So they thought we were just like anybody else, and that's when the pharmacogenomics
That's right, then the
came.
pharmacogenomics came. Perfect. At least 50% of accelerated approvals go into regular approval in 5 years. Is it good? I don't have an answer to that. I think what Amol mentioned is in February 10, 2022, this was one of the first papers which were followed by many other papers. And they said that accelerated approval, is it time for a reset? That is something which is there. Just wanted to add that please remember, we showed the examples, as Amol said, there are also bad examples, but because of faster process, we have many new drugs which have replaced the standard of care, which is an add-on therapy to the standard of care and a good alternative to standard of care. Okay. There is absolutely 0% phase 3. That was one of the points which Parikh sir pointed out, that phase 3 randomized trial only in 20% and 2 RCTs were only in 7% of trials. I wanted to ask, should we have not understood these drugs if we didn't have these rules? Like MSI high in Keytruda were based on small phase 2 studies. This is pooled data in 2017 or 18, where we got a blanket approval for MSI high and pembrolizumab. Nivo EP in first line MSI high CRC, it is still a phase 2 data. One of the most important NTRK inhibitors, and this is Chirag bhai. Do you think that biology or the genomics like NTRK, can we ever have phase 3 data?
That is not possible.
That is not possible.
So we have to rely on more patients, basket umbrella type of phase 1 trials only.
Right, absolutely. Perfect. So that is what I wanted to say. And yes, Amol, no, I have only one more minute before I invite Govind Babu sir. Amol, question to you. S1 drug, Tegafur, Jimeracil and Otoracil is still not approved by US FDA. Okay, but I showed you one paper of JAMA Network Open where SOX is equivalent to Folfox in adjuvant setting in operable gastric cancer. Would you replace SOX with Folfox in your patients? Even though there was no, you told me that if none of the FDA approval is there, you would be afraid to use this drug in your clinic.
You
would still use it. Okay. Sumant, would you use?
I'll be skeptical.
You would be, why?
Because I think that this particular thing is randomized to a very small subtype. Like you said, the ERASER study. The final outcomes of the study you came to know when the mixed populations were studied. So all these S1 trials are limited to 1 or 2 countries in most of the trials.
No, Japan, China, India, Europe.
Yeah.
We have now 4. It's a small data, but we have the data.
Govind Babu sir was saying that when they studied, they were clubbed in the wrong. So you have to have a better trial, then you can contradict FDA approval.
Same data pe agar FDA approval hota, to would you have accepted?
Discuss with the patient.
Perfect. So your confidence would have increased if the FDA approval.
Let me put in one line that our trust, howsoever corrupt they may be, but our trust on Americans is much more than the trust on the Japanese and Chinese, for whatever reasons.
Bharat, what about you? Would you replace Folfox with SOX? SOX is so easier, yaar. Folfox mein you are worried about cardiac, you are worried about mucositis. SOX is so easier.
Sir, I am also worried about FDA and the patient. Patient will go to the Google and check, and then again they'll come to me. So I feel FDA approval makes it easier for us to treat these patients and to be on the safer side. Law is very important.
Okay. Perfect. We come. So this is my last final slide, but I would like to start from Bharat till here. If everybody, if they want to say one line about today's manuscript and discussion, and then we invite Govind Babu sir. Bharat.
I think there are a lot has been talked about the paper by you, Parikh sir, and I think good insights by Chirag sir. So I feel good discussion has happened, but again, we need these drugs faster for our patients. That's the key. But yeah, process should be scrutinized more, and we should analyze the trials well. That's all. But ultimately, we again go back to FDA and the approval and the use of drug.
तारिणी ये सोच रहा था कि फाइनल कमेंट में तुम कुछ टिप्स दोगे, ये तो ये बोल दिया. Well taken, Bharat. Uma?
No, I agree with Bharat. I think accelerated approvals, though, I think they are important in oncology, honestly. But yeah, like Amol mentioned, that the confirmatory trials have to go hand along, and we should get a confirmation within like a few years. That is very important.
Okay. Chirag bhai.
So any approval by any regulatory authority and incorporation in any guideline, we have to be vigilant, on that drug. That is important.
Absolutely. So true. Stalin.
Accelerated approval process need to be there. So, but when we are using the drug, we should be like, for example, you showed the alectinib. So for a drug like alectinib, you know that is less toxic, you know that is going to be efficacious, you can practice it. For an accelerated approval like a drug like durvalumab, so you know that there is no much of benefit and you will not be using it in biliary tract. So that accelerated approval to make into clinical practice need to be decided by us and to be discussed with the patient. But the process need to be there.
Stalin, so well said, so well said. Sumant.
So on a lighter note, I think Dr. Tarni will not get money from the Astra sponsors after today's deliberations. But on a serious note, yes, whatever all the panelists have said and whatever you are trying to communicate is, take it with a pinch of salt, but keep trying for the betterment of the patient.
Amol.
What I feel is that we have to look at the disease condition and the rarity of the disease and then take into consideration. For example, if the drug is coming for BRAF inhibitors or KRAS inhibitors, I will take the accelerated approval. Or for the drug which is coming in the third line or fourth line metastatic setting, I will take an accelerated approval. The problem starts when the company starts pushing the same drug from metastatic to adjuvant, to neoadjuvant, to maintenance, and that is where the problem starts. That's the first thing. Second thing, the time and the long-term follow-up has to be there. If you see that paper which I was discussing, and if you see the table of the drugs discussed, and if you see the HR ratios, the least HR ratio is for idelalisib.
Correct.
And if you know that,
0.97.
0.37, the least HR.
Okay.
And if you know now that idelalisib is withdrawn. So that means it is the longer follow-up, the longer results is very important for us to take a call. And rarer the condition, more is the easier approval for us as a treating doctors. See, we are all doctors and we want our patients to do well. But the problem starts when the company starts pushing the same thing for minor benefits from metastatic to adjuvant, to neoadjuvant, to maintenance. That is where the problem starts.
I think, just to add a little prerogative being a moderator, what Sudeep has been teaching me ever since OBTO started is he doesn't look at hazard ratio, he doesn't look at statistics much, he looks at the actual benefit which is going to the patient. For example, he said in ovary, 3 to 4 months doesn't make so much of a difference to me unless until 10 to 12 months, I will not look at the change. But there are certain diseases like, second line pancreas or third line pancreas, you don't even have 3 months. There even 2-3 months difference also will make a difference. I think that is how we have to look at these papers and do that. I thank all the panelists. This is an amazing and wonderful discussion. And I would invite Govind Babu sir. Sir has been one of the senior most medical oncologists, and he has extensive experience of doing clinical trial, and as we saw that his site was audited by US FDA also. In fact, Govind Babu sir, one of the first, I can say that he is the one who brought nimotuzumab to India. He was one of the pioneer of the trial which was done by Biocon. And today, sir, we would like to hear from you. What do you think in last 1.5 hours?
Thank you, Amish. What I've heard the last 1.5 hours has been really fantastic. I think just to again reiterate that this has been one of the best programs that I've been following over the last year. Thanks to you and Dr. Purvish. So coming to this paper, Purvish has already given you all the details of this paper. I think what is striking is all of us have been taking FDA for granted all these years. And as Amol also said, we hold the US in high esteem. I mean, no, it's not wrong in that because they have a lot of processes in place, but wherever there are human beings, there are bound to be problems. And I think that is what we need to understand. And I think the important thing is we learn from the mistakes that they make. We don't have to repeat those mistakes. And coming to the authors of this paper, they're from across US and the Europe, and the views, what most of us would call as the Atlantic divide. So it is good that it has happened, and we need to see that this is a true thing. Now coming back to what the interview was saying, the first part was the trial participation. I think it is very good that we get involved because, as he said, we get a first-hand experience of using this molecule. That is the first thing, the science part of it. The second one is a lot of our patients will benefit. But again, you remember this is not true research. This is an outsourced thing that we are doing for somebody else who has designed a trial. But of course, there are benefits in this. Getting drugs that are not available here on a patient-to-patient basis is again important. Just to give an example, I've been using sacituzumab for a patient who has failed 4 or 5 lines of therapy. So I think that is also important. And I think Uma mentioned today, patients are all so well informed, they'll come and tell you, you need to give me this. So I think we need to update ourselves as well. The paper as such, it's a good study as you have all understood. And this had 190 trials from 2000 to 2020. And if you have noticed, the number of patients are decreasing in the trials. I think this is bound to happen because the trial designs are different today. You cannot compare the trials today to what we were doing with chemotherapy because we are looking at pathway-driven tumors, and those will have specific drugs that are going to be used. And therefore, we may not even be doing phase 3 trials in these. As Amish mentioned, you have a pathway and then you have a drug that works on this pathway, so that is truly personalized medicine. So that is the important thing, and I think Purvish mentioned that the new way of designing trials or what you would follow is adaptive clinical trials. I think this was discussed in one of our ASCO clinical trials workshop as well. So that is true. And to talk about approvals getting rapidly and then looking at them over a period of time to see if the results hold on is very, very important. Even in the chemotherapy trials, we have had this problem. And many times the sponsors, they say that this trial design was mandated by the regulators. One of the classical examples offhand I can remember is the Abraxane trial. They compared 260 milligrams per meter square of Abraxane versus the standard paclitaxel. And they showed that this was superior to the conventional paclitaxel. Of course, they also had quality of life, the side effects, everything. So I actually asked the PI of this study, don't you think this is a flawed study? He said the regulators mandated this. But then, Abraxane is approved, we've been using, and we now have long-term data as well. So that is, those are important things to remember. So when a drug is approved, we need to really see how the trial was designed, what are the endpoints, whether there was any discrepancy in the 2 arms. So that's important. The other thing that was discussed was DCGI approvals. I think we know that compensation part is also there. And approvals, what I heard from the sponsors is that the DCGI approvals are much faster. The drug approvals and the approvals for starting clinical trials in India. Earlier it used to go on for about 1 year, 1.5 years. Now I believe within 3 years they're approving the clinical trials, which is good for all of us. The point about PFS and OS, this has been debates in several conferences. But the point is, you also saw that accelerated approvals are given just based on PFS and many times not OS. So I can talk both ways. PFS is important because I believe that there is so much research going on and so many new drugs coming in. So if you're able to keep the patient alive for an amount of time, you can always get this new drug used for this patient. And OS, of course, either the patient is alive or dead, so it's a definite endpoint. But if you always wait for OS, that may not be the right thing because of these rapidly evolving drugs that are coming up. And if you look at just PFS, most of the immunotherapy drugs would not be approved because you don't see the PFS benefit, but there is OS benefit. So I think these are the points that I wanted to make, and the European guidelines and the US guidelines. I think Purvish mentioned that the US FDA works on the law that is there. They don't have any control over the cost-benefit ratio. Whereas the ESMO guidelines has this, the MCBS scale that is there. So I think that is important that most of us are using this, the MCBS scale. So that's important. So I think these are the few points that I wanted to make. Otherwise, the paper has been really dissected out and everything has been spoken of. So I think that's been very good. Thank you, Amish, and thank you, Purish.